Imagine turning on the TV in the 1950s and being greeted by a smiling mother in a neatly pressed dress, pearls around her neck, and not a single hair out of place. She's baking pies, folding laundry, greeting her husband at the door with a kiss, and making sure the kids are always on their best behavior. Sounds like the perfect life, right? But here's the question. Was this really everyday reality, or was it a carefully constructed dream? Step into post-war America, where prosperity was booming, suburbia was expanding, and millions of families were chasing stability after years of hardship. The 1950s housewife wasn't just a woman at home. She was the symbol of the American dream. Picture rows of new homes with white picket fences, shiny cars and driveways, and housewives who seemed to have it all under control. It was an image broadcast everywhere, shaping what society thought family life should look like. Television and magazines played a huge role in promoting this ideal. Shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best showcased women who were endlessly patient, perfectly dressed, and always ready with a warm meal. Advertisements reinforced the message, showing radiant housewives thrilled about the latest washing machine, vacuum, or boxed cake mix. Success wasn't only measured by a man's career or a family's income, it was measured by how flawlessly a woman could keep her home and how happy she looked doing it. This image wasn't accidental. After World War II, the nation craved normalcy. Housewives became the guardians of that stability, the ones who created order and comfort inside the home. At the same time, they became the targets of America's growing consumer culture. Companies knew that women made most of the household purchasing decisions, so they marketed heavily to them. Every appliance, every packaged meal, every product came with the promise of making her life easier, while still keeping her responsible for perfection. Yet behind the glossy magazine covers, reality was different. Real women faced exhaustion, financial worries, and the quiet frustrations of being confined to a role that left little room for individuality. Still, the image stuck. It shaped how Americans viewed gender roles, family life, and even the nation's identity. So here's my question to you. Do you think the image of the perfect 1950s housewife still lingers in our expectations of women and families today? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep uncovering the hidden stories behind the American dream. Writing. In the neighborhoods of 1950s America, the housewife's world was not limited to her kitchen or her living room. Beyond her daily responsibilities at home, she stepped into the larger stage of community life, where her influence quietly shaped the culture of the time. Suburban streets and small-town blocks often had a rhythm of their own, and women played a central role in keeping that rhythm steady. The local parent-teacher association became one of the most visible extensions of a housewife's work. At school events, bake sales, and meetings, mothers came together not only to support their children, but also to help guide the direction of the schools themselves. They planned fundraisers that provided resources classrooms couldn't afford, and organized activities that brought families closer to the heart of education. In many ways, the PTA became a bridge between the private world of the home and the public responsibilities of the community. Churches, too, reflected the presence of these women. Sunday mornings might have been about worship, but throughout the week, housewives filled basements and fellowship halls with the sounds of activity. They organized charity drives for families in need, prepared communal meals, and created outreach programs that gave local neighborhoods a sense of moral grounding. In the 1950s, when religion was deeply intertwined with American identity, these efforts carried a weight far greater than the tasks themselves. Alongside formal organizations, countless smaller clubs gave women a space for connection. Sewing circles, gardening clubs, and book groups might seem like simple hobbies, but they were lifelines of companionship. They allowed housewives to share advice, swap skills, and provide one another with encouragement in the midst of everyday challenges. These circles often became places where women found both friendship and a voice, even if that voice did not yet extend into politics or the workplace. The result was a web of influence that stretched far beyond individual households. Housewives became the quiet architects of social stability, creating bonds among neighbors and shaping the values of the next generation. Their unpaid, often unrecognized work sustained the cultural heartbeat of their communities. When we picture the 1950s housewife, it's easy to imagine her standing at the stove or folding laundry. But just as often, she was in the school gym, the church kitchen, or a neighbor's living room, building the networks that defined an entire era of American life. In the 1950s, the housewife's role extended far beyond the walls of her home. While much of popular culture emphasized kitchens, cleaning, and family care, women were also deeply involved in shaping the social fabric of their neighborhoods. Community organizations, clubs, and volunteer work became extensions of domestic responsibility, allowing housewives to influence education, religion, and civic life in ways that were often overlooked. Parent-teacher associations, or PTAs, were among the most common outlets. Mothers were expected to be active participants in their children's schooling, not just by helping with homework, but by organizing bake sales, fundraisers, and events. These contributions went far beyond small tasks. They directly supported schools financially and helped establish a sense of community ownership in education. In many towns, the PTA became a place where women's voices shaped local policies, even if informally. Church groups were another cornerstone of social influence. Housewives often ran charity drives, prepared meals for community events, and organized gatherings that reinforced both religious and cultural values. These activities offered a way for women to maintain strong community bonds and to model morality and service as essential parts of family life. In an era when church attendance was a defining part of American identity, women's leadership in these spaces played a vital role in strengthening social cohesion. Beyond schools and churches, housewives also formed clubs, gardening groups, sewing circles, and literary societies that may have seemed purely recreational, but served deeper purposes. They created networks of support, places to share advice, and opportunities for women to express themselves outside of household duties. In these groups, friendships were forged, skills were exchanged, and community projects were often planned. This social participation also reinforced cultural norms. By taking active roles in community organizations, housewives passed along expectations about gender roles, family values, and civic responsibility. Their influence shaped how children understood community involvement and how neighbors related to one another. At the same time, the visibility of their efforts gave women a form of leadership, even in a period when formal political and professional opportunities were limited. In many ways, these networks of clubs and associations were as important to the American dream as suburban homes or shiny new appliances. They demonstrated how housewives acted not only as keepers of the household, but as builders of communities, quietly guiding the values and priorities of post-war America. By the end of the 1950s, the role of the American housewife had become more than a cultural norm. It was a national symbol. Her image filled advertisements, television screens, and magazines, presenting her as the guardian of family life and the very essence of the American dream. Yet, even as this role seemed firmly established, social and cultural currents were already beginning to shift. The legacy she left behind is layered. It reflects both the strengths of her contributions and the challenges of living within such a tightly defined identity. For families of that era, the presence of a dedicated homemaker offered a kind of stability that many remembered fondly for decades. Children grew up in homes where meals were cooked from scratch, beds were neatly made, and daily routines created a sense of order. For husbands returning from long hours at work, the home often symbolized rest and reassurance, a world where someone cared for every detail. These experiences became part of the cultural DNA of America, shaping expectations of what family life should look like long after the 1950s ended. But beneath that surface, dissatisfaction simmered. Many women, while grateful for the chance to build families and homes, felt the walls of their roles closing in around them. They were educated, capable, and creative, yet opportunities to use those abilities beyond domestic life were scarce. A college degree, if pursued at all, was often framed as preparation for being a better wife and mother rather than as a step toward independence. Dreams of careers, artistic pursuits, or leadership roles were frequently dismissed as impractical or inappropriate. The image of perfection that looked so glossy in advertisements often felt restrictive and isolating in reality. As the 1960s unfolded, these quiet frustrations began to transform into something louder. The publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in 1963 gave language to feelings many women had kept private. She described the problem with no name, a gnawing sense of emptiness, despite having everything society told them should bring fulfillment. For countless women, Friedan's words struck like a lightning bolt, revealing that their struggles were not individual failings, but shared experiences shaped by cultural expectations. This awakening helped fuel the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s, which challenged the idea that a woman's place was only in the home. Demands for equal pay, reproductive rights, access to education, and career opportunities began to reshape the American landscape. The housewife, once held up as the ideal, now became a figure against which new definitions of womanhood were measured. Yet her influence did not disappear. The housewife of the 1950s had shown remarkable resilience, resourcefulness, and dedication. Even as women moved into the workforce in greater numbers, the values of care, stability, and family commitment remained deeply respected. In fact, the legacy of her labor became part of the ongoing conversation about how society measures work, reminding us that unpaid domestic labor is as vital to a nation's success as any paycheck earned outside the home. Her image also left a permanent mark on consumer culture. The 1950s had established the housewife as the ultimate decision-maker in the marketplace, and that logic endures today. Advertisers still tie identity and fulfillment to the products people buy, a strategy rooted in the lessons of that earlier era. The smiling woman in a spotless kitchen may no longer dominate magazine covers, but the underlying idea that consumption shapes identity remains a cornerstone of modern marketing. Culturally, the 1950s housewife stands as both a reminder and a challenge. She reminds us of an era when security and prosperity were tied to order and tradition. But she also challenges us to question how narrow definitions of identity can limit human potential. Her story is not only about what was gained, but also about what was sacrificed, dreams deferred, ambitions silenced, and individuality often set aside. Today, her figure lingers in memory, sometimes romanticized in nostalgic media, sometimes critiqued as a symbol of constraint. But perhaps her greatest legacy is the conversation she inspired. By embodying both the promise and the limitations of the American dream, she forced future generations to ask harder questions. What does fulfillment truly mean? How do we balance family, work, and individual identity? And how can a society ensure that opportunity is not defined by gender roles? The story of the 1950s housewife, then, is not frozen in time. It is part of a larger arc, a reminder that cultural ideals are never permanent, that they can be redefined, and that each generation has the chance to rewrite what the dream should be. In her quiet strength, her sacrifices, and even her frustrations, she shaped not only her own era, but the trajectory of American life for decades to come.